Popular ESPN analyst Stephen A. Smith joined Abby Phillips on her CNN show to opine on the state of the Democratic primary and some potential new entrants into the race. Let's take a look.
I mean, look, he's a popular guy, but what do you make of just the idea that, I mean, according to this, real people in politics have approached him and said, you should consider this?
Well, first of all, real people in politics have approached me and talked to me about running. It ain't happening. I'm not interested. Let me get that out of the way.
Running for president?
But let's understand, it running for president, it speaks to the level of desperation that exists in this country, Abby. That's really what's going on here. It's not about Dwayne Rock Johnson. It's an indictment against the presumed candidates for the 2024 election. Like you pointed out at the top of your show, you've got one former president that without question, I mean, Boo-Boo the Fool knows, he will engage in a campaign of vengeance if he is the president of the United States again. He will not rest until he gets back at everybody who's gotten at him. That's his MO. In the case of Biden, we're seeing somebody that just doesn't seem lucid and confident enough to be on that position 4 years from now. Maybe at this moment, yes, but do you have the confidence that he can do what you need him to do and run in this country for 4 years, starting in 2024 when he's 82 years old? The answer is absolutely not. So guess what? If you want to ask me or anybody else, Dwayne Rock Johnson, yeah, I'd vote for him before I voted for one of those two.
So he's not alone in his hypothetical support for Dwayne The Rock Johnson. So apparently, after a poll showed that 46% of Americans would support his campaign.
Biden would kill for those numbers.
Right? So what do you make of this commentary from Stephen here? It sounds like a lot like what we say here all the time, and what is frankly a perspective that is not often heard in the context of a CNN panel.
No, for sure. I saw Sabby Sabs, who we have on the show sometimes, and she responded, I think, a little dismissively here. Why is CNN interviewing Stephen Smith about politics? Because he's a sports person, not a politics person. Okay, but that's kind of the just leave it to the experts approach that I don't think is necessarily good when the media does it or really quietly captures the mood of the country. There are a lot of people who like Stephen A. Smith and probably agree with him that I clearly agree with them. We can know it from polls that they are totally dissatisfied with the choices of Biden and Trump for president. And they don't like those individuals. They think they're way too old. They think Biden is so old, and then Trump has all the baggage that he has, and are looking for any alternative thing to grasp onto. I don't think The Rock going to run for president. People say this about The Rock. People said this about Kid Rock. Maybe there's just something about being a rock-based celebrity that calls to you to run for political office. So I don't think it's going to happen, but it does point to, the real attitude. Like, Stephen Smith's not a political expert, but he votes. People like him vote.
Right.
Most of the people voting, the actual electorate, are not political news junkies.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wish they were, and I wish they were watching our show, every single second of it. But frankly, we don't even talk about politics for the whole show because sometimes it gets a little boring and it gets a little tit for tat and actually starts to resemble just sports commentary. So I think there's a real attitude here.
I think that, frankly, Stephen A. Smith, coming from a world outside of politics, but where he's very much doing commentary, is a good barometer. Now, I don't co-sign the idea that it should be someone like Dwayne The Rock Johnson, simply because we know absolutely nothing about his politics, what he supports, and he's kind of like generic independent. It's like saying a generic independent polls well. We don't know what he thinks about gun control. We don't know what he thinks about healthcare. We don't know what he thinks about Ukraine. We don't know what he thinks about anything. So this poll was done back in 2021. He describes himself as a centrist and a political independent. So beyond that, who even knows? So I echo Sabby's frustration insofar as she's saying, well, why are we talking about The Rock? He should be talking about other candidates that are in the mix who actually have policies that would benefit the American people. However, generally speaking, his critique of why the Democratic Party is digging a real hole for itself by refusing to acknowledge the real frustration that he's channeling about Biden's age and out of touchness with the American people, that I want to hear more of. That, I think, is a really good wake-up call to the people watching CNN.
I do think it's kind of interesting increasingly to hear this criticism of Trump that people that, as Stephen Smith made there, you're hearing it from a lot of Democrats and a lot of mainstream people. We interviewed Michael LaRosa today and talked about Jen Psaki, both making this criticism that Trump cannot be let in office again because Trump's revenge will be too terrible, and he's coming to get all of his political enemies. And without necessarily endorsing this view, I want always people, I think, in the Democratic coalition or mainstream people, non-Trump people, to understand that one of the things that drives Trump voters to cling to him is their perception that exactly what you just described is what's happening to them and what's happening to him. That he is currently the victim of a vengeance campaign by prosecutors at the state and national level, that he was impeached twice, that they're literally trying to put him in prison. Now, you can respond to that by saying, well, the things they're doing there are legitimate. But of course, if Trump were to win the presidency and then fire people who he thinks are incompetent or for cause, or that wouldn't be, if you're just going to knee-jerkly call that revenge, well, isn't that exactly what they're doing to him? So you have to, my point being, you have to take on the individual merits of each of the things without saying, it would just be so terrifying if Trump came into office and replaced some of the bureaucracy with his people. Like, that's just politics. Yeah. That's just, it's not entirely winner take all because the federal bureaucracy is incredibly entrenched, but if he were to win office, part of the reason people are voting for him is to change the culture in Washington, D.C. I would argue he didn't accomplish that to nearly a good enough degree the first time around. But I'm interested in pushing back on this revenge idea a little bit.
Democrats should be running on that. I was listening to Pod Save America, and apparently Biden is rolling out and testing, with some success, a message about how Trump said that these specific auto plants were going to stay open if he became president, and they closed, and really pointing to specific promises, these kind of populist promises that he reneged upon at the same time that Biden is obviously standing with the UAW workers, et cetera. I think that's a much more useful line of attack for the Democrats to go on, but their problem is not just with the idea that Trump is Mussolini and he's going to do revenge and take political prisoners if he gets back in office. The line that they've been using, the threat of Trump, has often been, for a long time, been abortion rights, which, of course, now are already over, and this idea that he was going to attack specific populations, namely Muslims and the Muslim ban. And now we've heard from so many Arab Americans that they feel like what Joe Biden is enabling in Palestine is way worse than the Muslim ban, and that would take 100 Muslim bans over 10,000 people dead in Gaza. So what are you going to say to these voters now? Abortion rights are gone. And it happened during the Biden administration. Obviously, the stage was set a long time before Biden, but it happened during the Biden administration. And now, frankly, it's the only saving grace for Democrats, the fact that they're able to run on abortion. And many voters are looking at that and saying, you failed to codify Roe as a right, even when you had the votes to do it, even when Barack Obama was running in 2008 saying that was the first thing on my agenda. You declined to do so. You didn't want to waste your political capital on doing that. And on some level, maybe you knew that it was a useful political carrot to dangle to make people have fidelity to the Democratic Party, even when you betrayed every other promise. You put us in this position. You didn't force Ruth Bader Ginsburg to retire. And now you're using it as a political cudgel to get us to keep voting for you again and again. And maybe this is the line in the sand, and we're not going to do it. We've already lost everything, and we're not going to keep coming out for you. This is the level of despair the Democratic Party is contending with. And I don't know if the hand-waving from Jen Psaki and these other establishment tastemakers is going to do it. Yeah, when it's almost like they're saying it won't be business as usual if Trump takes over again. He's going to do things his handlers can't control. That sounds great to a lot of voters. They're like, great, where do I sign up? Sure. How do I vote for him? More Rising right after this. Stay tuned.